What happens when a threat meant to protect you becomes the words that seal your fate? When 19-year-old Claire Winters snarled those defiant words at the Comanche warrior who purchased her, she expected violence, expected chains, expected anything but what came next. He smiled, cut her ropes, and walked away, leaving her more confused and terrified than any threat ever could. The Arizona sun hung like molten copper in the sky, beating down mercilessly on the makeshift trading post that had sprung up near the dried riverbed. Claire Winters stood on the warped wooden platform, her wrists bound so tightly that the hemp rope had rubbed her skin raw and bleeding. Her auburn hair, once carefully pinned in the proper style her mother had taught her, now hung in tangled waves down her back, matted with dust and sweat. The pale green dress she wore, the one she'd been so proud of just 5 days ago, was torn at the shoulder and stained with dirt and blood. Not all of it hers. 5 days ago, everything had been different. 5 days ago, she'd been traveling with her uncle's wagon train from Santa Fe to the new settlement near Prescott, dreaming of the teaching position waiting for her at the small schoolhouse. 5 days ago, she'd had a future. Then the Apache raiders had struck at dawn, scattering the wagons, killing the men who fought back, taking the women and children who survived. Claire had watched her uncle fall with an arrow through his chest. She'd watched her aunt dragged away screaming. She'd felt rough hands grab her, had fought like a wildcat until someone struck her across the face hard enough to make stars explode behind her eyes. Now she stood here, one of 6 captives being sold to whoever had coin or goods to trade. The other 5 women, all older than Claire, had already been purchased by rough-looking trappers and a Mexican trader. They'd gone quietly, eyes downcast, spirits already broken. Claire refused to follow their example. Her jaw was set, her green eyes blazing with fury despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "Now this one here's a hellcat," announced the auctioneer. A sweating pig of a man named Sykes who reeked of whiskey and tobacco. He grabbed Claire's arm, and she immediately jerked away from him with such force that she nearly lost her balance. "See what I mean? Got spirit, this one. Young too. Maybe 19, 20 at most. Can read and write," she says. "Educated. That's worth something." "It's worth nothing out here," called out a bearded trapper from the small crowd. "A woman who thinks she's better than her station ain't no use to anybody." Claire's eyes flashed. "I am better than any of you filthy savages," she spat. "My father was a federal judge in St. Louis. When people find out what you've done, you'll all hang." Sykes backhanded her across the mouth, hard enough to split her lip. Claire tasted blood but refused to cry out, refused to give them the satisfaction. She lifted her chin higher, her eyes burning with defiance. "See? Needs taming, but once you break her, she'll make a fine wife or house servant." Sykes continued, wiping his meaty hand on his filthy shirt. "Strong too. Good hips for breeding. I'll start the bidding at $15. Silence greeted his announcement. The handful of men gathered around the platform exchanged glances but said nothing. $15 was steep for a difficult captive, especially one who looked like she'd sooner stab you in your sleep than cook your breakfast. $10 then, Sykes amended, his voice growing irritated. "Come on, boys. You won't find fresher stock than this." Still nothing. Claire felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. What happened to captives nobody wanted? The question hung in her mind like a noose. $5, Sykes tried again, desperation creeping into his tone. "That's a steal for a woman this young." $3 silver, came a voice from the back of the crowd. Deep, calm, and speaking English with only the faintest accent. The crowd parted, and Claire got her first look at the man who'd spoken. He was Comanche, that much was immediately clear from his dress and bearing. He sat astride a magnificent gray and white paint horse, his posture relaxed but commanding. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30 at most, with sharp features and black hair that fell past his shoulders, decorated with a single eagle feather. His buckskin clothing was finely made, adorned with intricate beadwork that marked him as someone of importance. But it was his eyes that caught Claire's attention. Dark and intelligent, they studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Well now," Sykes said, surprise evident in his voice. "Stone Wolf, didn't expect to see you at this trading post. Your people usually stick to the northern territories, so the Comanche had a name." Stone Wolf. Claire filed that information away. Though she couldn't imagine why it mattered, Stone Wolf dismounted in one fluid motion and approached the platform. He moved with the grace of a predator, each step deliberate and sure. $3 silver, he repeated, pulling the coins from a leather pouch at his belt. "No more." Sykes looked around hopefully, but none of the other men seemed inclined to outbid the Comanche warrior. There was something in Stone Wolf's bearing that discouraged competition. "She's difficult," Sykes warned, though his hand was already reaching for the coins. "Tried to bite one of the Apache who brought her in. Nearly succeeded too. I can see her spirit," Stone Wolf replied, his eyes never leaving Claire's face. "That is why I offer coin." Claire's heart hammered against her ribs as understanding dawned. This savage was going to buy her. Own her. Do God knows what with her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The ropes binding her wrists were tied to an iron ring bolted to the platform. "Sold then, for $3 silver," Sykes declared, snatching the coins before Stone Wolf could change his mind. He moved to untie Claire from the platform, but she jerked away violently. "Don't touch me," she hissed. "I swear to God, I'll kill the first one of you who lays a hand on me." Sykes raised his hand to strike her again, but Stone Wolf stepped forward, his movement quick despite his apparent calm. "I have purchased her," he said quietly. "She is mine to discipline, not yours." Something in his tone made Sykes lower his hand and step back. Stone Wolf climbed onto the platform and began untying the rope that bound Claire to the iron ring. She stood rigid, every muscle tensed for flight or fight, though she knew both were futile. "Touch me and I'll kill you," Claire said, her voice low and deadly serious. She meant every word. She'd been raised a lady, taught to be gentle and proper, but something had broken inside her during those 5 days of captivity. She discovered reserves of rage and determination she never knew existed. "I don't care what you paid for me. I'm not yours. I'll never be yours. The first chance I get, I'll put a knife in your heart." Stone Wolf paused in his untying and looked at her. Really looked at her, as if seeing past the dirt and blood and torn dress to something deeper. Then, to her complete shock, he smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile or a mocking one. It was almost amused, impressed. "You have fire," he said simply. Then, instead of tightening the ropes as she'd expected, he pulled out a knife. Claire's breath caught. This was it. He was going to kill her right here for her defiance, but Stone Wolf didn't raise the knife toward her. Instead, he cut through the ropes binding her wrists in 2 quick strokes. The hemp fell away, and Claire stumbled backward, rubbing her raw, bleeding wrists in confusion. "What are you doing?" she demanded, suspicious of this unexpected mercy. "You said you would kill me if I touched you," Stone Wolf replied, resheathing his knife. "So I will not touch you." He gestured toward his horse. "But you will walk beside my horse until we reach the river camp. It is half a day's journey. If you run, the desert will kill you before I need to chase you. If you stay, you will have water and food." Claire stared at him, completely thrown off balance. This wasn't how captors were supposed to behave. Where were the chains? The violence? The cruel assertions of dominance? "I don't understand," she said, hating how confused she sounded. "You do not need to understand," Stone Wolf said. He turned and walked off the platform, moving toward his horse with that same fluid grace. "You need only to choose. Die in the desert, or live another day to make good on your threat to kill me. The casual way he said it, as if her death threat was something mildly interesting rather than enraging, only confused Claire more. She looked around wildly. Sykes had already moved on, counting his coins. The other men were dispersing. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she could see nothing but scrubland and distant mountains in every direction. Stone Wolf mounted his horse and began riding away at a walk, not even looking back to see if she would follow. Claire stood on that platform, freed but not free, faced with an impossible choice. Every instinct told her to run, to take her chances with the desert rather than submit to captivity. But the rational part of her mind, the educated part that her father had nurtured, knew that was suicide. She had no water, no food, no knowledge of the land. She'd be dead by nightfall. Cursing under her breath, hating herself for it, Claire stepped off the platform and began walking after the Comanche warrior, who had just purchased her for $3 silver. She kept her distance, staying at least 20 feet behind the horse, her eyes scanning constantly for any opportunity to escape. They traveled in silence for over an hour. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became almost unbearable. Claire's throat grew parched, her lips cracking and bleeding. She'd had nothing to drink since early that morning, and the physical exertion of walking through loose sand was draining what little strength she had left. Still, she refused to ask Stone Wolf for water. She'd die before she begged him for anything. Finally, Stone Wolf stopped beside a cluster of scraggly mesquite trees that provided minimal shade. He dismounted and pulled a water skin from his horse, taking a long drink. Claire watched, her throat aching with thirst. But she remained silent. Stone Wolf looked at her, then deliberately set the water skin on a rock halfway between them before moving back to his horse. "Drink," he said. "Or don't. The choice is yours." Claire's pride warred with her desperate thirst. Pride lost. She practically ran to the water skin and drank deeply, the lukewarm water the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. She drank until her stomach ached, until some of her dizziness cleared. "Why are you doing this?" she asked when she finally lowered the water skin. "Why free my hands? Why give me water?" Stone Wolf was checking his horse's hooves, not even looking at her. "Would you prefer I beat you? Chain you?" "I'd prefer you explain what you want from me," Claire shot back. "Nobody purchases a captive just to free them." "I have not freed you," Stone Wolf corrected, still focused on his horse. "You are still my captive, purchased with fair coin. But I have learned that a captive who chooses to stay is more valuable than one kept in chains." "I'm not choosing to stay," Claire said hotly. "I'm choosing not to die in the desert." "There's a difference, is there?" Stone Wolf finally looked at her, and again she saw that hint of amusement in his dark eyes. "You are here. You are walking beside my horse. You are drinking my water. Whether you call it choice or survival, the result is the same," Claire wanted to argue, wanted to rage at the circular logic, but she had no response. He was right, and they both knew it. "Why did you buy me?" she asked instead. There were other captives. Older, more broken, easier to control. Stone Wolf swung back onto his horse. "I did not want easy," he said simply. "I wanted fierce." He nudged his horse forward. "Come, we have far to travel before dark." They continued their journey through the increasingly rugged landscape. The terrain shifted from flat scrubland to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pine. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks touching the clouds. Despite her situation, despite her fear and anger, Claire couldn't help but notice the stark beauty of the land. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they reached a small creek winding between rocky outcroppings. Stone Wolf stopped and dismounted. "We camp here tonight," he announced. "The river camp is still many hours away. It is not wise to travel these lands in darkness. Claire watched warily as Stone Wolf began gathering wood for a fire. He worked efficiently, his movements practiced and sure. Within minutes, he had a small fire burning, its warmth welcome as the desert temperature began to drop with the setting sun. Stone Wolf produced some dried meat from his saddlebag and offered a piece to Claire. She hesitated, then took it, too hungry to refuse. The meat was tough and heavily salted, but it was food, and her empty stomach accepted it gratefully. They ate in silence, the crackling fire the only sound between them. Claire studied her captor covertly, trying to understand him. He didn't fit any of the stories she'd heard about Comanche warriors. He wasn't cruel or savage. He was calm, controlled, almost civilized. The thought felt like a betrayal of everything she'd been taught, but she couldn't deny what her eyes were telling her. "You said you wanted fierce," Claire finally said, breaking the silence. "Why?" Stone Wolf was quiet for so long that Claire thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "2 winters ago, my wife died," he said. "She was gentle, obedient, everything a Comanche woman should be. But when sickness came to our camp, when others fought to live, she simply gave up. She had no fire inside her, no will to fight death." He looked at Claire across the fire. "I will not make that mistake again. The woman who shares my lodge must have the strength to survive anything." Claire's anger faltered slightly at this unexpected confession. She'd expected him to say he wanted fierce so he could enjoy breaking her spirit, or some other cruelty. Instead, he'd revealed something deeply personal. A wound that obviously still pained him. "I'm sorry for your loss," she heard herself say. Then immediately cursed herself for showing sympathy to her captor. Stone Wolf nodded in acknowledgement. "You asked why I bought you," he continued. "Now I ask you something. Why do you fight so hard to live? Most white captives I have seen break quickly. They lose hope. But you threatened to kill me, even knowing I could end your life with ease. Why?" Claire considered lying, then decided there was no point. "Because I refused to let them win," she said fiercely. "The men who killed my uncle, who took me and the others. They want us broken, want us to be less than human. I won't give them that satisfaction. I'll fight every moment of every day until I'm free or I'm dead." A slow smile spread across Stone Wolf's face. "Good," he said. "That fire will keep you alive in the hard times ahead." "What hard times?" Claire demanded. "What are you planning for me?" "I plan nothing," Stone Wolf replied. "You will live with my people. You will learn our ways. What happens after that depends on you." "I'll escape," Claire said flatly. "First chance I get." "Many captives say that," Stone Wolf said, lying back and using his saddle as a pillow. "Most never try. Those who do rarely survive. But you are welcome to attempt it." He closed his eyes. "Sleep now. Tomorrow will be a long day." Claire stared at him in disbelief. "You're just going to sleep? You're not going to tie me up? Where will you go?" Stone Wolf asked without opening his eyes. "You have no horse, no weapons, no knowledge of this land. The nearest white settlement is 5 days' travel east. You would die before reaching it. So sleep or don't sleep. The choice is yours." There was that phrase again. "The choice is yours." As if she had any real choices at all, Claire sat by the fire long after Stone Wolf's breathing had deepened into sleep. She studied the landscape around them, considering her options. He was right, of course. She had no idea where she was or how to get anywhere. The night was growing cold, and without proper clothing or supplies, she'd likely freeze before dawn if she tried to run. But tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow she'd watch for an opportunity. She'd find a way to steal his horse, or at least some supplies. She'd find her way back to civilization somehow. She had to believe that, had to hold on to that hope. Or she'd become like the other captives she'd seen, empty-eyed and broken. As the fire burned down to embers and the stars emerged in brilliant profusion overhead, Claire finally allowed herself to lie down, keeping as much distance between herself and Stone Wolf as the small camp allowed. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained, but sleep was slow to come. Her last thought before finally drifting off was of Stone Wolf's words. "I did not want easy. I wanted fierce." Claire woke to the sound of a horse nickering softly and the smell of smoke from a rekindled fire. For a moment, she forgot where she was, reaching instinctively for the quilt that should have covered her bed. Her hand found only hard ground and coarse fabric. Memory crashed back like a physical blow. Stone Wolf was already awake, crouched by the fire, cooking something that smelled surprisingly appetizing. The sun hadn't yet cleared the eastern mountains, but the sky was brightening from black to deep purple. Claire sat up slowly, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. She'd spent most of her life in relative comfort, and the past days of captivity followed by yesterday's long march had left her feeling like she'd been trampled by horses. "You did not run," Stone Wolf observed without looking at her. "It wasn't a question. I'm not stupid," Claire replied, her voice hoarse from thirst and sleep. "Dying in the desert proves nothing. Wisdom, Hood." He held out a flat piece of bark with some kind of cooked grain cake on it. "Eat. We leave when the sun touches that ridge." Claire took the food warily, half expecting it to be some kind of test or trick. But it was just food, still warm, with a nutty flavor that wasn't unpleasant. She ate quickly, her stomach growling its appreciation. Stone Wolf handed her the water skin without being asked. Claire drank, watching him over the leather container. In the pale morning light, she could see details she'd missed yesterday. He was younger than she'd first thought, probably not much past 30. There was a scar along his left forearm, pale against his copper skin, and another smaller one near his temple. His hands were calloused but moved with practiced efficiency as he packed his supplies. "How far to this river camp?" Claire asked, handing back the water skin. "We will arrive before the sun is overhead," Stone Wolf replied. He doused the fire with dirt and began saddling his horse. "My people will have many questions about you. What will you tell them?" Claire stood, brushing dust from her ruined dress. "That you found a stupid white girl who threatened to kill you?" Stone Wolf actually smiled at that. "I will tell them I found a woman with the heart of a warrior and the tongue of a rattlesnake. They will decide for themselves what to make of you, and if they decide they don't want me there." "You are mine," Stone Wolf said simply, as if that settled everything. "Where I go, you go. What I claim, I keep. This is our way." The possessive statement should have terrified Claire, or at least angered her. Instead, she felt an odd sense of security. However limited her situation, at least she belonged to someone who seemed rational, who hadn't hurt her despite ample opportunity. They set out as the sun breached the mountain peaks, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. The terrain grew more rugged, with steep ravines and scattered boulders that forced them to pick their way carefully. Stone Wolf led his horse on foot now, navigating the treacherous ground with the sure-footedness of someone who knew every rock and crevice. Claire followed, her battered shoes slipping on loose gravel more than once. She refused to complain, refused to show weakness, but Stone Wolf must have noticed her struggles because he suddenly stopped. "Your shoes are useless here," he said, studying her feet with a critical eye. "They will break your ankle before we reach camp." "I don't have any other shoes," Claire shot back. "In case you hadn't noticed, I didn't exactly pack for this journey." Stone Wolf moved to his horse and rummaged in one of his packs. He pulled out a pair of soft leather moccasins, clearly too large for Claire, but infinitely better than her destroyed button-up shoes. "Where did you get those?" Claire asked suspiciously. "They were my wife's," Stone Wolf said quietly. "She was tall like you." "They may fit." Claire stared at the moccasins, suddenly understanding what he was offering. These weren't just shoes. They were a piece of someone he'd loved, someone he'd lost. The gesture felt impossibly intimate. "I can't take these," she said, her voice softer than before. "You can, and you will," Stone Wolf replied. She would have wanted them used, not left to rot in a pack. "Sit." Claire sat on a nearby boulder, and Stone Wolf knelt before her. For a moment, she tensed, remembering her threat from yesterday. But he made no move to touch her. Instead, he set the moccasins beside her feet and moved back. "Put them on," he instructed. "Lace them tight around the ankle. The ground ahead is rough." Claire removed her ruined shoes and slipped her feet into the moccasins. They were too large, but when she tightened the laces as Stone Wolf had instructed, they fit well enough. The soft leather was like nothing she'd ever worn, conforming to her feet in a way her rigid Eastern shoes never had. "Better?" Stone Wolf asked. "Yes," Claire admitted grudgingly. "Thank you." Something shifted in Stone Wolf's expression at those two words. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. "You have manners beneath that rattlesnake tongue," he observed. "My mother raised me properly," Claire said, then felt a sharp pang in her chest. Her mother was back in St. Louis, probably had no idea what had happened to her daughter. Would never know, most likely. Stone Wolf saw the pain flash across her face. "Your mother," he said. "She is alive?" "She was when I left St. Louis 6 months ago," Claire replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I was traveling to meet my aunt in Prescott. I was supposed to teach at the new school there, now." She gestured helplessly at her situation. "Now you are here," Stone Wolf finished. "The path we walk is not always the path we choose." "That's a pretty way of saying I'm your prisoner," Claire said bitterly. "You are not a prisoner," Stone Wolf corrected. "Prisoners are kept in chains, locked away. You walk freely beside me, because chains aren't necessary when there's nowhere to run," Claire countered. Stone Wolf studied her for a long moment. "You are angry. Good. Anger keeps you strong. But anger alone will not help you survive what comes next." "And what comes next?" Claire demanded. "You keep saying that, but you won't tell me what you're planning." "I plan nothing," Stone Wolf said, mounting his horse. "Tomorrow is not yet here. Today we walk. When tomorrow comes, we will face it then." The infuriating non-answers made Claire want to scream. But she bit back her frustration and followed as they continued their journey. The new moccasins made a remarkable difference. Her feet no longer slipped on loose rock, and she could feel the ground beneath her, allowing her to pick her way more carefully. They descended into a wide valley where a river cut through red rock canyon walls. The sound of rushing water reached Claire's ears, and she felt a desperate thirst she hadn't realized she'd been suppressing. Stone Wolf led them down a narrow trail that switched back and forth along the canyon wall. At the bottom, the river ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Stone Wolf let his horse drink while Claire knelt at the water's edge and cupped her hands, drinking deeply. The water was achingly cold and tasted of minerals and stone. She drank until her stomach protested, then splashed water on her face and neck, washing away layers of dust and dried sweat. When she looked up, Stone Wolf was watching her with an unreadable expression. "What?" Claire asked defensively. "You are different when you forget to be angry," he said. "Softer. Don't mistake exhaustion for softness," Claire warned. But there was less venom in her voice than before. They followed the river downstream for perhaps an hour. The canyon walls gradually lowered, opening into a broader valley dotted with cottonwood trees. And there, spread along both banks of the river, was the Comanche camp. Claire stopped dead, her heart suddenly racing. From a distance, she could see dozens of hide lodges arranged in loose clusters. Smoke rising from cooking fires, horses grazing in a makeshift corral, children playing in the shallows of the river, women working on stretched hides, men sitting in groups, talking or working on weapons and tools. It was a village, a community. Not the savage war camp she'd imagined, but a place where people lived their daily lives. "Come," Stone Wolf said, noticing her hesitation. "They will stare, but no one will harm you. You are under my protection. That's what I'm afraid of," Claire muttered. But she forced her feet to move. As they approached the camp, people began to notice them. Children spotted them first and came running, shouting excitedly.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Adults emerged from lodges, shading their eyes against the sun to see who approached. The camp dogs barked and circled Stone Wolf's horse. Stone Wolf called out something in Comanche, his voice carrying across the camp. The effect was immediate. People stopped what they were doing and began gathering, curiosity evident on every face. Claire felt dozens of eyes on her, assessing, judging, wondering. An older man, his face deeply lined and his long hair streaked with gray, stepped forward. He wore a magnificent war shirt decorated with intricate quill work and carried himself with unmistakable authority. He spoke to Stone Wolf in rapid Comanche, his tone questioning. Stone Wolf replied at length, gesturing occasionally toward Claire. The older man's eyes moved to her, studying her with an intensity that made Claire want to shrink back. But she forced herself to stand straight, to meet his gaze without flinching. Finally, the older man spoke again. And Stone Wolf turned to Claire. "This is Tall Bear, chief of our band," Stone Wolf explained. "He asks why I have brought a white woman to our camp. What did you tell him?" Claire asked, very aware of the hostile stares from some of the gathered crowd. "I told him you were a gift from the spirits, sent to teach me patience," Stone Wolf replied with a completely straight face. Claire couldn't help it. Despite everything, despite her fear and anger and exhaustion, she laughed. It burst out of her before she could stop it. Sharp and slightly hysterical, the laughter seemed to surprise everyone, including Stone Wolf. Tall Bear's stern expression cracked slightly, and some of the tension in the crowd eased. "You have a strange sense of humor for a captor," Claire said when she could speak again. "And you have a strange sense of humor for a captive," Stone Wolf countered. He turned it back to Tall Bear and spoke again in Comanche, this time with what sounded like more detail. An elderly woman pushed through the crowd, moving with surprising speed despite her age. She was tiny, barely reaching Claire's shoulder, but there was something formidable about her. She circled Claire slowly, poking at her dress, tugging at her hair, muttering to herself in Comanche. "This is Spotted Dove," Stone Wolf said. "My mother's sister. She is examining you like she would examine a horse. Should I be flattered or insulted?" Claire asked through gritted teeth as the old woman prodded her ribs. "Neither. It is her way." Stone Wolf spoke to Spotted Dove in Comanche, and the old woman replied sharply, waving her hands expressively. Stone Wolf actually looked embarrassed. "What did she say?" Claire demanded. "She says you are too thin and too pale, but your teeth are good and your eyes show intelligence," Stone Wolf translated. "She also says I paid too much for you. I could have told you that," Claire muttered. Spotted Dove barked something else, pointing at Claire's dress with obvious disdain. Other women in the crowd began offering opinions, their voices rising in what sounded like an argument. "They are discussing whether your dress can be salvaged or if you need new clothing," Stone Wolf explained, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the sudden female consensus building around him. "I need a lot of things," Claire said. "New clothing is probably the least of them." A young woman, perhaps a few years older than Claire, stepped forward. She had a kind face and spoke to Stone Wolf in a gentler tone than the others. Stone Wolf's expression softened as he replied. "This is Laughing Water," he told Claire. "She offers to help you get settled. She speaks a little English, learned from traders." Laughing Water smiled at Claire and said slowly, "You come." "I help." Before Claire could respond, Spotted Dove grabbed her arm with surprising strength and began pulling her toward one of the larger lodges. Claire shot a panicked look back at Stone Wolf. "Go," he said. "They will feed you, clean you, give you proper clothes. I must speak with Tall Bear and the council." "Wait," Claire called out, suddenly terrified of being separated from the one person here she somewhat understood. "What happens to me?" Stone Wolf met her eyes across the growing distance between them. "You survive," he said simply. "As you have been doing." Then the women surrounded her completely, pulling her into the lodge, their voices a confusing mixture of Comanche and broken English. Claire caught fragments. Water, wash, eat, but it was overwhelming. She was stripped of her ruined dress before she could protest, her modesty preserved only by her chemise and petticoat. Warm water was brought in large clay pots, along with something that smelled like sage. The women washed her hair, their hands surprisingly gentle, working out the tangles and dirt. They cleaned her wounds, applying a paste that stung but seemed to help. They gave her food, some kind of stew with meat and corn that was delicious. Despite her inability to identify half the ingredients, through it all, Laughing Water stayed close, offering Claire reassuring smiles and simple words of English. "Safe here," she said more than once. "Stone Wolf, good man. No hurt you." Claire wanted to believe that, wanted to trust these people who were showing her more kindness than she'd experienced since her capture. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. She was still a captive, still surrounded by enemies, still desperate to find a way home. As the women worked, Claire studied the lodge. It was larger than she'd expected, with a fire pit in the center and sleeping areas arranged around the perimeter. Buffalo robes and woven blankets provided bedding. Parfleches, the containers, held supplies. It was organized, clean, comfortable even. Not at all what she'd imagined a savage dwelling would be like. Finally, the women presented her with new clothing. A soft deerskin dress, dyed a pale yellow and decorated with blue and white beadwork. It was beautiful, far more elegant than anything Claire owned back in St. Louis. She ran her fingers over the intricate beadwork, marveling at the craftsmanship. "You like?" Laughing Water asked hopefully. "It's beautiful," Claire admitted honestly. "Who made this?" Laughing Water pointed to herself proudly. "I make, for Stone Wolf wife, but she die." "Now you have," the words hit Claire like a physical blow. This dress had been made for Stone Wolf's dead wife. She was literally stepping into a dead woman's life, wearing her shoes, her clothes, living in what had probably been her lodge. "I can't," Claire started to say, trying to hand the dress back, but Spotted Dove cut her off with a sharp command. Laughing Water explained gently. She say, "Dead need nothing. You need everything. Wear dress. Honor memory." Reluctantly, Claire pulled the dress over her head. It fit surprisingly well, though it was slightly loose in the bodice. The soft leather felt strange against her skin, so different from the cotton and wool she was accustomed to. When the women finally allowed her to emerge from the lodge, the sun was high overhead. The camp had returned to its daily rhythms. Children played. Women worked. Men talked or worked on various tasks. Claire stood uncertainly, not knowing where to go or what to do. Stone Wolf appeared at her elbow so suddenly that she jumped. He studied her in the new dress, his expression unreadable. "You look Comanche," he finally said. "I'm not," Claire replied firmly. "No matter what I'm wearing." "No," Stone Wolf agreed. "But you could be, in time. I won't be here that long," Claire insisted. Though the words felt increasingly hollow, Stone Wolf gestured for her to follow him. They walked to the edge of the camp, where the river bent around a stand of cottonwood trees. The sounds of the camp faded to a distant murmur. "The council has agreed you may stay," Stone Wolf said. "But there are conditions." "Conditions?" Claire's stomach tightened. "Here it comes," she thought. "Whatever he really wants from me, you will work like all women work," Stone Wolf explained. "You will learn our language, our customs. You will be respectful to the elders and kind to the children. In return, you will be fed, clothed, and protected. That's it. Claire asked suspiciously. There must be more. Stone Wolf was quiet for a moment. The council says that after one full turn of the moon, 1 month, I must decide what becomes of you permanently. Decide what? What does that mean? It means, Stone Wolf said, carefully, that you cannot remain indefinitely as simply a woman I purchased. You must either become part of the tribe through marriage, or you must be traded away to another band, or return to your people if that becomes possible. Claire's mind raced. 1 month. She had 1 month to figure out how to escape, to get back to civilization. Or 1 month until she was forced into an even worse situation. And if I refuse all those options? She asked. Stone Wolf met her gaze steadily. Then the choice will be made for you. The threat was implied but clear. Claire felt trapped. The walls closing in despite standing in an open valley under an endless sky. I won't marry you, she said flatly. Or anyone else here. I'd rather die. I have not asked you to marry me, Stone Wolf pointed out. I have simply told you what the council requires, but that's what you want, isn't it? Claire accused. You said you wanted fierce. You said your wife was too gentle. You bought me to replace her. Stone Wolf's expression hardened. I bought you to save your life, he said coldly. The men at that trading post would have used you until you broke, then sold you to someone worse. I gave you a chance to survive with dignity. If you see that as a threat, then you understand nothing. He turned and walked away, leaving Claire standing alone by the river, shame and anger warring in her chest. She wanted to call him back, to apologize, but her pride wouldn't let her. Instead, she sank down on a smooth river stone, buried her face in her hands, and for the first time since her capture, allowed herself to cry. 2 weeks had passed since Claire's arrival at the river camp, and she had learned more in those 14 days than she'd thought possible. The Comanche way of life was nothing like what she'd been taught to expect. There was order here, structure, rules that everyone followed. The women were not slaves as she'd imagined, but vital members of the community who owned the lodges and everything in them, whose opinions carried weight in decisions affecting the band. Claire had been assigned to help Spotted Dove and Laughing Water with daily tasks. At first, she'd been clumsy and slow, her soft hands blistering from unfamiliar work. Tanning hides was back-breaking labor that left her arms aching and her back screaming. Gathering firewood meant hiking miles through rough terrain. Hauling water from the river in heavy clay pots tested muscles she didn't know she had. But gradually her body adapted, her hands toughened, her muscles strengthened. She learned to move with purpose and efficiency. The children had been the first to truly accept her. They were endlessly curious about the white woman with the strange hair and green eyes. A little girl named Prairie Flower, perhaps 6 years old, had attached herself to Claire like a shadow. She would sit beside Claire as she worked, chattering away in Comanche and giggling when Claire tried to repeat the words back. Through Prairie Flower's patient teaching, Claire was slowly learning the language. Stone Wolf had kept his distance since their argument by the river. Claire told herself she was relieved, that she didn't care whether he spoke to her or not. But she found her eyes seeking him out across the camp, watching as he worked with the horses or sat in council with the other men. He never looked her way, never acknowledged her presence. The absence of his attention felt like a physical thing on the 15th morning. Claire woke before dawn to help Laughing Water prepare the morning meal. The other woman had become something like a friend, teaching Claire with gentle patience and never mocking her mistakes. As they worked together grinding corn, Laughing Water spoke quietly in her careful English. Stone Wolf watches you, she said, her tone matter-of-fact, Claire's hands stilled on the grinding stone. He hasn't spoken to me in 2 weeks. He watches, Laughing Water repeated. When you work, when you play with children, when you learn our words. She smiled. He watches like Wolf watches deer, patient, waiting, for what? Claire asked, unsettled by the comparison. Laughing Water shrugged. Waiting for you to stop running, even when you stand still. The cryptic answer frustrated Claire, but before she could press for more, Spotted Dove appeared and barked orders. There was to be a feast that evening, celebrating the safe return of a hunting party. Everyone had tasks to complete, and idle conversation was not among them. The day passed in a blur of activity. Claire helped prepare food, working alongside women who had begun to accept her presence, if not fully trust her. She learned to make pemmican, mixing dried meat with fat and berries. She helped construct a temporary brush shelter for the feast. She even learned to start a fire using methods that didn't require the matches she'd taken for granted her whole life. As the sun began its descent, the camp transformed. People emerged in their finest clothing. The men wore shirts decorated with elaborate quillwork and paint. The women dressed in beautifully beaded dresses and wrapped themselves in soft buffalo robes. Even the children were scrubbed clean and dressed carefully. Claire had nothing fine to wear except the yellow dress Laughing Water had given her. She'd kept it as clean as possible, but after 2 weeks of hard work, it showed signs of wear. She was trying to brush dust from the hem when Spotted Dove appeared carrying a bundle. The old woman thrust the bundle at Claire and spoke rapidly in Comanche. Claire caught only a few words, but the meaning was clear when she unwrapped the bundle to find a stunning dress of white deerskin, decorated with intricate beadwork in blues and greens that seemed to shimmer in the fading light. There were matching moccasins and a beautiful bone hair clasp. "I can't accept this," Claire protested. But Spotted Dove was already pulling at Claire's current dress, clearly intending to help her change whether Claire wanted help or not. Laughing Water appeared and explained, "Spotted Dove make this. For you, you are part of camp now." "You dress like camp." Claire felt tears prick her eyes. The gesture was so unexpected, so generous from a woman who'd initially seemed hostile. She allowed the women to help her into the new dress, to braid her auburn hair and secure it with the bone clasp, to paint her cheeks with a subtle touch of red ochre. When they finally allowed her to see her reflection in a polished piece of metal, Claire barely recognized herself. She looked like a Comanche woman. The realization should have horrified her. Instead, she felt a strange sense of belonging that terrified her more than any threat could have. The feast began as darkness fell. A huge fire blazed in the center of the camp, and people gathered around it in loose circles. Food was brought out, more than Claire had seen in one place since arriving. There was roasted venison and buffalo, corn cakes and wild onions, berries and honey, and dishes Claire couldn't identify but tasted eagerly. The men told stories, their voices rising and falling in dramatic cadences. Even without understanding all the words, Claire could follow the tales of hunts and battles, of clever tricks and narrow escapes. The children sat wide-eyed, completely absorbed. The women listened while working on endless tasks, their hands never still. Then the drums began. The sound seemed to pulse through the earth itself, a rhythm that Claire felt in her chest. Men stood and began to dance, their movements precise and powerful, telling stories through motion. Women joined, their steps different but equally meaningful. The fire cast dancing shadows, and the drums grew louder, more insistent. Prairie Flower grabbed Claire's hand and pulled, trying to draw her into the circle of dancers. Claire resisted at first, self-conscious and uncertain. But the little girl was persistent, and other women were gesturing for her to join. Finally, Claire allowed herself to be pulled to her feet. She had no idea what she was doing, but she tried to follow the steps she saw, moving in time with the drums. Prairie Flower giggled at Claire's clumsy attempts, but it was friendly laughter, encouraging rather than mocking. Other women adjusted Claire's movements gently, showing her through touch and example. It was exhilarating and terrifying and joyful all at once. Claire found herself laughing, actually laughing, as she danced around the fire with people who should have been her enemies. The drums seemed to erase everything else. All her plans to escape, all her anger and fear, leaving only the pure physical joy of movement and music. When she finally stumbled back from the circle, breathless and flushed, she found Stone Wolf standing at the edge of the firelight, watching her. Their eyes met across the flames, and something passed between them. Some understanding or acknowledgement that Claire couldn't name. He approached slowly, and the women around Claire suddenly found reasons to move away, leaving them in a bubble of relative privacy despite the crowd. "You dance," Stone Wolf said. "It wasn't a question, badly," Claire replied, still catching her breath. "But yes, you look happy," he observed. Claire wanted to deny it, to insist she was merely playing a part, biding her time. But the lie wouldn't come. "I was," she admitted quietly. "For a moment, I forgot. Forgot what? That I don't belong here. That this isn't my life." Claire looked away from him, staring into the fire. "Your aunt made me this dress. Laughing water teaches me words. Prairie flower follows me everywhere. They're making me one of them, and I don't know how to stop it." "Why would you stop it?" Stone Wolf asked. "Because it's not real," Claire said desperately. "Because I was taken. Because no matter how kind everyone is, I'm still a captive who was purchased for $3 silver. Stone Wolf was quiet for a long moment. The drums continued their relentless rhythm, and voices rose in song around them. "Come," he finally said. "Walk with me." It wasn't a command, Claire realized. It was a request. She could refuse. But something made her nod and follow as he led her away from the feast, toward the river where the sounds of celebration faded to a distant murmur. They walked in silence until they reached a rocky outcropping that overlooked the water. The moon was nearly full, painting everything in silver light. Stone Wolf sat on a flat boulder, and after a moment's hesitation, Claire sat nearby, careful to maintain distance between them. "You think you are the only one who has had to choose between two worlds?" Stone Wolf asked quietly. Claire looked at him, surprised by the question. "When I was a boy. Perhaps 10 winters," he continued. "Staring out at the moonlit water, I was taken by white missionaries. They had a school, a place where they said they would teach Indian children to be civilized." His voice turned bitter on the last word. "They cut my hair, which is sacred to our people. They beat me when I spoke Comanche. They forced me to wear white man's clothes, to eat white man's food, to pray to a white man's god." Claire felt her breath catch. She'd heard rumors of such schools, but had never really thought about what they meant. "For 2 years, I lived in that world," Stone Wolf continued. "I learned to read their books, to write their words. I learned their history and their prayers. And slowly, I began to forget who I was. I began to believe that being Comanche was wrong, something to be ashamed of. How did you get away?" Claire asked softly. "I didn't, at first. I ran 3 times, and 3 times they found me and brought me back. The punishments grew worse each time." He touched the scar near his temple. "This is from the last beating. They said they were teaching me discipline, but they were trying to kill who I was inside. But you escaped eventually. My father came," Stone Wolf said simply. "He rode for 5 days to reach that mission. He walked into their chapel during a service, picked me up, and carried me out. The missionaries tried to stop him. He told them in perfect English that they could teach children or they could break children, but they could not do both. Then he brought me home." Claire processed this story, understanding dawning. "You know what it's like," she said. "To be caught between 2 worlds." "Yes," Stone Wolf agreed. "And I know what it is to choose. When I returned to my people, I was not the same boy who had been taken. I had white man's knowledge in my head, white man's words on my tongue. Some people said I was contaminated, no longer truly Comanche. But my father told me something I have never forgotten." "What?" Claire asked, completely absorbed in his story. "He said that strength comes not from rejecting one world or the other, but from taking the best of both and making something new. Stone Wolf turned to look at her directly. You think you must choose to be Claire the white woman or Claire the Comanche captive. But maybe you can be both. Maybe you can be something that belongs to neither world and both worlds at once. The concept was too large, too overwhelming. Claire shook her head. I don't know how to do that. You are already doing it, Stone Wolf pointed out. You work beside our women, but teach our children English words. You wear our clothes, but keep your own way of thinking. You dance at our feast, but hold yourself apart. You are building a bridge between two worlds, whether you realize it or not. A bridge to nowhere, Claire said bitterly. In 1 month, your council will force me to choose. Marriage or exile. Those aren't real choices. What if I told you there was a third option? Stone Wolf asked carefully. Claire's heart began to race. What option? I have been speaking with Tall Bear and the council elders, Stone Wolf said. I told them you have valuable skills. You can read and write, which few here can do. You understand white man's medicine. You could teach our children, help us understand the treaties and documents the white soldiers bring. You could be useful to the tribe in ways that have nothing to do with being someone's wife. Hope flared in Claire's chest, bright and painful. You mean I could stay without marrying? If the council agrees, yes, Stone Wolf said. You would have your own lodge, your own place in the tribe. You would be free to make your own choices. Why? Claire demanded. Why would you do this for me? Stone Wolf was quiet for so long that Claire thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. Because you were right, that day by the river. I did see you as a replacement for what I lost. But you are not a replacement. You are Claire, fierce and stubborn and brave in ways my wife never was. You deserve to be seen for who you are, not who I wanted you to be. The honesty in his words struck Claire like a physical blow. This man who had purchased her, who could have claimed her as property, was offering her freedom. Real freedom, not the illusion of choice. I don't understand you, Claire whispered. You could force me to marry you. You have that power. Power that comes from force is no power at all, Stone Wolf replied. My father taught me that too. A woman who chooses to stand beside you is worth more than 100 who are forced. They sat in silence, the river rushing past below them, the distant sound of drums still pulsing through the night. Claire's mind raced with possibilities and implications. Could she really make a life here? Could she truly belong to a people who had once been her enemies? What about my mother? Claire asked suddenly. What about my old life? If I stay here, even with my own lodge, I'm still cutting myself off from everything I knew. Are you? Stone Wolf challenged. Or are you simply adding to what you were? You can still be the educated woman from St. Louis, but you can also be the woman who learned to survive in the wilderness, who made friends with Comanche women, who danced around a fire under the stars. Nothing you were is lost unless you choose to lose it. The logic was compelling, almost irresistible. But Claire had been burned by hope before. And what do you get from this arrangement? She asked suspiciously. What's in it for you? Stone Wolf smiled, that rare expression that transformed his entire face. I get to watch you become whoever you choose to be, he said simply. Without interference. Without expectations. That is enough, is it? Claire pressed. Because it seems like you're giving up a lot for nothing. I am giving up nothing, Stone Wolf corrected. I am setting something free that was never meant to be caged. There is honor in that. Claire wanted to argue, wanted to find the trap she was sure existed in his words. But she was tired of fighting, tired of being angry and afraid every moment. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to try something different. I'll think about it, she said finally. But I'm not promising anything. I ask for nothing more than consideration, Stone Wolf replied. He stood, offering his hand to help her up. Claire looked at the outstretched hand, remembering her threat from that first day. "Touch me and I'll kill you." Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and took his hand. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip firm but gentle. He pulled her to her feet, and for a moment they stood close enough that Claire could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for telling me your story, for understanding. We are not so different, you and I," Stone Wolf said. "Both caught between worlds, both trying to find where we belong." They walked back to the feast together, not quite touching but not as distant as before. The celebration was still in full swing, the drums still beating their irresistible rhythm. As they emerged into the firelight, Claire felt eyes turned toward them, felt the weight of speculation and curiosity. But for the first time since her capture, Claire didn't care what others thought. She had been given something precious tonight.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
Not freedom in the way she'd originally imagined it, with escape and return to her old life, but freedom to choose, to build something new, to become someone she'd never imagined she could be. Laughing Water appeared at Claire's elbow, her eyes bright with questions. Prairie Flower ran up and grabbed Claire's hand, pulling her back toward the dancers. And as Claire allowed herself to be drawn once more into the circle, into the music and movement and joy, she caught Stone Wolf watching her from across the fire. This time, she didn't look away. Instead, she smiled, a genuine expression that felt foreign on her face after so many weeks of anger and fear. Stone Wolf smiled back, and in that moment, something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but understanding, respect, the beginning of something that might, given time, become trust. The drums beat on into the night, and Claire danced until her legs ached and her breath came in gasps. She laughed at her own clumsiness and at Prairie Flower's giggles. She accepted food from women who were slowly becoming friends. She let herself, just for this one night, stop fighting and simply exist. Later, as she lay in the lodge she shared with Laughing Water and Spotted Dove, listening to their quiet breathing in the darkness, Claire thought about Stone Wolf's words. A bridge between two worlds. Something new made from the best of both. It was a beautiful idea, perhaps too beautiful to be real. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth finding out. For the first time since her capture, Claire fell asleep without crying, without planning escape, without counting the days until her nightmare would end. Instead, she fell asleep wondering what tomorrow might bring, and whether she had the courage to embrace it. The third week brought unexpected challenges that tested everything Claire had learned. A group of Comanche warriors rode into camp at dawn, their horses lathered and exhausted, carrying 3 wounded men. One had an arrow lodged deep in his shoulder. Another had a gash across his ribs that wouldn't stop bleeding. And the third was unconscious with a fever that made his skin burn to the touch. Spotted Dove immediately took charge, barking orders that sent women running in every direction. Claire found herself pulled into the crisis without warning. The old healer pointed at supplies and rattled off instructions in rapid Comanche, assuming Claire would understand. When Claire hesitated, Spotted Dove grabbed her hand and pressed it against the unconscious man's forehead, then mimicked drinking water. Claire understood. Keep him hydrated. She could do that. For the next 6 hours, she worked alongside Spotted Dove and 2 other elder women, doing whatever was needed. She held men down while Spotted Dove extracted the arrow, the warriors' screams echoing through the camp. She applied pressure to wounds while herbs were prepared. She cleaned blood from cuts and burns, her stomach churning but her hands remaining steady. It was during this crisis that Claire discovered something unexpected about herself. The medical knowledge her father had shared during his practice, the anatomy lessons he'd taught her despite her mother's protests, that such things were unseemly for young ladies, all of it came flooding back. She found herself anticipating Spotted Dove's needs, understanding the logic behind treatments even when she couldn't understand the words. At one point, as they worked on the man with the fever, Claire noticed his breathing had become shallow and rapid. She'd seen this before, years ago, when her father had treated a patient with infected lungs. Without thinking, she positioned the man on his side and tilted his head back, opening his airway. Spotted Dove watched with sharp eyes, then nodded approval. She said something to the other women, and Claire caught the word for wise or knowing. Whatever she'd done, it had been right. By midday, the immediate crisis had passed. The man with the arrow wound would survive, though his shoulder would never be quite the same. The one with the gash across his ribs was resting, the bleeding finally controlled. But the fevered man's condition continued to deteriorate despite everything they tried. Claire sat beside him, wiping his face with cool water, watching his chest rise and fall with increasing difficulty. She'd seen this pattern before too, and the memory made her stomach clench with dread. Her father had lost a patient to lung fever when Claire was 15. She'd watched him fight for 3 days to save the man, trying every treatment he knew. And in the end, it hadn't been enough. Stone Wolf appeared in the lodge entrance, his face grave. He spoke quietly with Spotted Dove, who shook her head and replied in equally somber tones. Then Stone Wolf's eyes found Claire. "This man is my cousin," he said, switching to English for her benefit. "Running Deer. He has a wife and 2 small children." The weight of that information settled on Claire's shoulders like a physical burden. This wasn't just a patient. This was someone's husband, someone's father, someone important to Stone Wolf. "I'm doing everything I can," Claire said, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "But the fever won't break, and his lungs," she couldn't finish the sentence. Stone Wolf knelt beside his cousin, placing a hand on the man's burning forehead. He spoke in Comanche, words that sounded like a prayer or perhaps a promise. Then he looked at Claire with an expression she'd never seen from him before. Vulnerability. Fear. "In your world, among white doctors, is there anything else that can be done?" he asked. Claire's mind raced through everything her father had taught her. There was one thing, a treatment he'd used only twice, both times with mixed results. It involved creating steam with specific herbs to help clear the lungs, but it was dangerous. If done wrong, it could burn the patient's airways and kill him. "Faster than the fever. There might be something," Claire said slowly. "But I'd need specific plants, and it's risky. It could make things worse. He will die anyway if we do nothing," Stone Wolf said flatly. "Tell me what you need." Claire described the plants as best she could, using English names her father had taught her and hoping Stone Wolf could translate them to their local equivalents. He listened intently, then called for Laughing Water. A rapid conversation in Comanche followed, with Laughing Water nodding and asking questions. "She knows these plants," Stone Wolf told Claire. "She will gather them. But she says some do not grow nearby. It may take until nightfall to find everything. He might not have until nightfall," Claire said, looking at Running Deer's increasingly labored breathing. "Then we will hope the spirits give him strength," Stone Wolf replied. He squeezed his cousin's hand once more, then stood. "I will help Laughing Water search. Spotted Dove will stay with you." After he left, Claire continued her vigil beside Running Deer. Spotted Dove worked quietly nearby, preparing other medicines and occasionally checking the other wounded men. The afternoon dragged on with agonizing slowness. Twice, Running Deer's breathing stopped entirely, and Claire's heart lurched into her throat before it started again. Shallow and rattling, a woman appeared in the lodge entrance. She was young, perhaps Claire's age, with a baby strapped to her back and a small boy clutching her skirt. Her face was drawn with worry, and she spoke urgently to Spotted Dove. Spotted Dove replied gently, but whatever she said made the young woman's face crumple. She moved to her husband's side and took his hand, speaking to him in soft Comanche. The little boy began to cry, and Claire felt her own eyes sting with tears she refused to shed. This was Running Deer's family, his wife, his children. The people who would be destroyed if Claire couldn't save him. The young wife looked at Claire with desperate eyes and said something in Comanche. Claire didn't understand the words, but she understood the meaning. "Please, save him. Don't let him die. I'm trying," Claire whispered, knowing the woman couldn't understand her either. "I'm trying so hard." As the sun began to set, Stone, Wolf and Laughing Water finally returned, their arms full of plants. They'd found everything Claire had described and more, bringing extra in case something was needed. Claire's hands shook as she sorted through the vegetation, identifying each one and praying she remembered the process correctly under Spotted Dove's watchful eye and with Stone Wolf translating when necessary. Claire began the treatment. She created a makeshift tent over Running Deer using buffalo hides, then prepared the steam mixture in a clay pot placed over hot coals. As the water boiled and steam began to rise, carrying the sharp scent of medicinal herbs, she positioned Running Deer's head over the pot. The next hour was the longest of Claire's life. She monitored Running Deer's breathing constantly, adjusting the steam's intensity, watching for any sign of improvement or deterioration. Stone Wolf stayed beside her the entire time, his presence somehow steadying. His wife sat on Running Deer's other side, holding her husband's hand and singing softly to him. At first, nothing seemed to change. Then, gradually Running Deer's breathing began to deepen. The terrible rattling sound eased slightly. His fever, which had been climbing steadily all day, seemed to plateau. "It's working," Claire breathed, hardly daring to believe it. "I think it's actually working." Spotted Dove came closer, examining her patient with experienced eyes. She said something that made Stone Wolf's face brighten with hope. "She says the spirits have guided your hands," he translated. "That you have wisdom beyond your years." Claire wanted to protest that it wasn't spirits but science, knowledge her father had given her. But she held her tongue. What did it matter where the wisdom came from, as long as it saved a life? They maintained the steam treatment through the night, taking turns to keep watch. Claire dozed fitfully, jerking awake every time Running Deer's breathing changed. But as dawn approached, she realized he was truly improving. His fever had broken, leaving him soaked with sweat but cooler to the touch. His breathing, while still labored, was stronger and more regular. Running Deer's wife wept with relief, clutching Claire's hands and speaking rapidly in Comanche. Claire didn't need a translation to understand the gratitude pouring from the young woman. Stone Wolf touched Claire's shoulder gently. "You should rest," he said. "You have been awake for more than a day." Claire looked around the lodge. The other two wounded men were sleeping peacefully. Running Deer was past the crisis point. Spotted Dove was nodding off in the corner, exhausted from the long vigil. And Claire realized she was swaying on her feet, so tired she could barely think. "Come," Stone Wolf said, offering his arm for support. "I will walk you to your lodge." Claire was too exhausted to protest. She let him guide her through the early morning camp, where cook fires were just being rekindled and people were beginning to stir. The world seemed to tilt and sway around her, but Stone Wolf's arm remained steady. At the entrance to her lodge, Claire turned to face him. In the pale dawn light, she could see the exhaustion on his face too, the worry lines that hadn't been there yesterday. "Your cousin will live," she said, with more confidence than she felt. "He's not out of danger yet, but the worst is past. Because of you," Stone Wolf said quietly. "You saved his life." Claire shook her head. "Spotted Dove did most of the work. I just remembered something my father taught me." "You did more than remember," Stone Wolf insisted. "You acted with courage and skill. You gave everything you had to save a man you barely knew, one of the people who took you captive. That is extraordinary." The sincerity in his voice made Claire's throat tighten. "He's your cousin," she said simply. "He has a family. How could I do anything less? Stone Wolf smiled, that transformation of his features that Claire had learned to watch for. This is what I meant, he said. About building bridges between worlds. You bring knowledge from your world to help people in this one. You see past the divisions that others maintain. You are becoming something remarkable, Claire Winters. Claire felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with exhaustion or fever. I'm just trying to survive, she protested. No, Stone Wolf said firmly. Survival is what you were doing that first day. This is something more. This is living. Before Claire could respond, laughing water emerged from the lodge, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She took in the scene. Claire and Stone Wolf standing close together in the dawn light, and a knowing smile crossed her face. She said something in Comanche that made Stone Wolf laugh. What did she say? Claire demanded. She said the camp. We'll talk, Stone Wolf replied, his eyes dancing with amusement. About the white woman and the warrior who saved his cousin together. Let them talk, Claire said, surprising herself with her own boldness. I'm too tired to care about gossip. She turned to enter the lodge, but Stone Wolf caught her hand. The touch was gentle, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so unexpectedly courtly that it took Claire's breath away. Thank you, he said simply. For my cousin's life, for your courage, for being who you are. Then he released her hand and walked away, leaving Claire standing in the lodge entrance, with her heart pounding and her mind racing with thoughts that had nothing to do with exhaustion. The next few days passed in a blur. Running Deer continued to improve, slowly regaining his strength. His wife treated Claire like a hero, bringing her gifts of food and small handcrafted items, despite Claire's protests. Other women in the camp began seeking Claire's advice for various ailments. Usually accompanied by Spotted Dove to translate and supervise, Claire found herself learning medicine twice over. She learned which plants the Comanche used for different conditions, many of which her father had never mentioned. She learned spiritual healing practices that seemed strange to her but clearly brought comfort to patients. And she taught what she could in return, explaining concepts of cleanliness and wound care that sometimes conflicted with traditional methods. It was a delicate balance, respecting Comanche ways while offering what knowledge she had. Spotted Dove became her unlikely ally in this, the old woman recognizing that some of Claire's methods were effective even if they didn't align with traditional practices. Together, they created a hybrid approach that drew from both worlds. One afternoon, as Claire was grinding herbs under Spotted Dove's supervision, Tall Bear entered the lodge. His presence immediately commanded attention. He spoke at length to Spotted Dove, who responded with equal gravity. Claire sat frozen, understanding nothing but sensing this conversation was about her. Finally, Tall Bear turned to address Claire directly. He spoke in Comanche, his tone formal and measured. When he finished, he waited expectantly. I don't understand, Claire said helplessly. Looking to Spotted Dove for help, Stone Wolf appeared in the lodge entrance, as if summoned by Claire's confusion. He exchanged greetings with Tall Bear, then turned to Claire. The chief has made a decision about your future, Stone Wolf said, his expression carefully neutral. He wishes you to understand it fully. Claire's heart began to pound. The month wasn't up yet. Why was Tall Bear making this decision now? The council has met, Stone Wolf continued, translating as Tall Bear spoke. They have discussed your actions during the crisis with the wounded warriors. They have heard testimony from Spotted Dove about your healing knowledge. They have seen how you work alongside our women and teach our children. And they have made a determination. Claire held her breath, waiting for the verdict that would determine her fate. You will be adopted into the tribe, Stone Wolf said. And Claire could hear emotion creeping into his carefully controlled voice. Not as a captive, not as property, but as a full member. You will be given your own lodge and recognized as a healer. You will have all the rights and responsibilities of any Comanche woman. The council has spoken, and it is decided. Claire stared at him, unable to process what she just heard. Adopted? She repeated numbly. As a full member? Tall Bear spoke again, and Stone Wolf translated. The chief says your skills are valuable to the people. Your courage in healing running deer proved you think of others before yourself. This is the mark of someone worthy to be Comanche. If you accept this honor, you will undergo an adoption ceremony in 3 days. And if I refuse? Claire asked, though she already knew the answer. Stone Wolf's expression grew sad. Then you will be traded away to another band, one that has less progressive views. Or released near a white settlement, if any can be reached safely. In other words, accept adoption or lose everything she'd built here. The friends she'd made, the purpose she'd found. The sense of belonging that had slowly grown despite her resistance. Claire looked at Spotted Dove, who was watching her with those sharp, knowing eyes. The old woman had been harsh at first, but had gradually warmed to Claire, teaching her with patience and even what might have been affection. She looked at the lodge where Running Deer was recovering, where his wife and children waited for him to fully heal. She thought of Prairie Flower's giggles and Laughing Water's gentle friendship. She thought of Stone Wolf's words about building bridges between worlds. I accept, Claire heard herself say. I accept the adoption. Tall Bear's stern face broke into what might have been a smile. He spoke briefly, then placed a hand on Claire's shoulder in what seemed to be a gesture of welcome. Then he left, his business concluded. After he was gone, Claire turned to Stone Wolf. What have I just agreed to? She asked, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. What does this adoption ceremony involve? Many things, Stone Wolf replied, his expression softening. You will be given a new name, one that reflects who you have become. You will be formally welcomed into a family. You will make vows to the tribe and to the spirits. And you will, in every way that matters, become Comanche. But I'm still Claire Winters, she protested. I'm still the judge's daughter from St. Louis. Yes, Stone Wolf agreed. And you will also be something more. Is that not what we discussed? About being a bridge between worlds? Claire sank down onto a buffalo robe, her legs suddenly shaky. Everything was happening so fast. Just weeks ago, she'd been standing on that auction platform, vowing to kill the first person who touched her. Now she was accepting adoption into the tribe, voluntarily binding herself to a life she'd never imagined. Stone Wolf knelt beside her. You do not have to do this, he said gently. If you truly wish to return to your old life, I will help you reach a settlement safely. I will not force you to stay. No one's forcing me, Claire said slowly, testing the truth of those words. That's what's so strange. For the first time since I was captured, I feel like I'm actually choosing my own path. And I'm choosing this, them, you. The last word slipped out before she could stop it. Stone Wolf's breath caught. Claire, don't, she interrupted, not ready to examine what she just implied. Just tell me honestly. Is this really what you want? Me staying? Becoming one of your people? Yes, Stone Wolf said without hesitation. From the moment I saw you standing on that platform, refusing to be broken, I knew you belonged here. Perhaps not forever. Perhaps only for a season. But for now, yes. I want you to stay. Claire met his eyes and saw the truth there, along with something else she wasn't ready to name. Then I'll stay, she said firmly. I'll go through with the adoption ceremony. I'll become Comanche, or whatever strange hybrid of Claire and Comanche I'm capable of being. Stone Wolf smiled, that rare full expression that lit up his entire face. You will be magnificent, he said with absolute certainty. You already are. The adoption ceremony was scheduled for the night of the full moon, 3 days away. Those 3 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation that left Claire's head spinning. Laughing Water and Spotted Dove took charge of readying her, explaining traditions through a mixture of broken English, gestures, and patience that Claire found both touching and overwhelming. On the first day, she was taken to the river for a ritual cleansing. The water was achingly cold, fed by mountain streams, but Spotted Dove insisted she submerge herself completely 3 times. As Claire emerged gasping from the third dunking, the old woman began washing her hair with a mixture that smelled of sage and sweetgrass, chanting in a low voice that seemed to resonate with something deep inside Claire's chest. "This washes away old life," Laughing Water explained, helping to rinse Claire's hair. "Makes clean for new beginning. When you come from river, you are reborn." Claire wanted to ask if she could keep any of her old life, if rebirth meant completely erasing Claire Winters. But the words stuck in her throat. Maybe that was the point. Maybe becoming something new required letting go of what had been. That evening, Running Deer appeared at the lodge entrance, still weak but insisting on walking without support. His wife hovered nearby, ready to catch him if he fell, but he waved her off with gentle stubbornness. He approached Claire and spoke formally in Comanche, his voice carrying weight despite its weakness. Stone Wolf had accompanied him and translated. "My cousin says he owes you a life debt. Among our people, this is sacred. He asks what he can give you in return for saving him." Claire shook her head. "I don't want anything. I'm just glad he's recovering." When this was translated, Running Deer shook his head firmly and spoke again. Stone Wolf's lips twitched with suppressed amusement as he translated. "He says you are too modest, which is a good quality, but a life debt must be honored. Since you will not name a price, he will choose the gift himself. At your adoption ceremony, he and his wife will stand as your family sponsors. This is a great honor." Claire felt tears prick her eyes. "Please tell him I'm honored," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And that I need no payment for doing what anyone with a heart would do." Running Deer smiled when this was translated, then said something else that made Stone Wolf's expression grow serious. After Running Deer and his wife had left, Claire turned to Stone Wolf. "What else did he say?" she demanded. Stone Wolf hesitated, then replied, "He said you have the spirit of a warrior and the heart of a healer. He said his children will grow up knowing they owe their father's life to the white woman who became Comanche. He said you have brought honor to my family by association." "Your family?" Claire questioned. "Running Deer is my cousin," Stone Wolf reminded her. "His honor reflects on me and mine on him. By saving his life, you have elevated my standing in the tribe." He paused, then added quietly, "Though that was not why I hoped you would help him." "I know," Claire said softly. "You were just worried about someone you love." I understood that. Their eyes met and held, and something unspoken passed between them. The air seemed to thicken with words neither was quite ready to say. The second day was devoted to preparing Claire's ceremonial clothing. Spotted Dove had been working on it in secret, she learned, ever since Claire had first arrived at the camp. The dress was made of the softest white deerskin Claire had ever touched, decorated with thousands of tiny blue and white beads arranged in intricate patterns that must have taken months to create. There were matching moccasins, a beautiful buffalo robe painted with symbols Claire didn't yet understand, and a necklace of bear claws that Laughing Water explained had belonged to Stone Wolf's mother. His mother? Claire protested. "I can't accept something so valuable." But Spotted Dove cut her off with a sharp gesture and rapid speech. Stone Wolf, who seemed to materialize whenever Claire needed translation, appeared in the lodge entrance. "My aunt says my mother would have wanted you to have this," he said, his voice carrying an emotion Claire couldn't quite identify. "My mother believed in signs from the spirits. Before she died last winter, she told Spotted Dove that a white bird would come to our camp, bringing healing and change. She said this bird would wear her claws and become a bridge between earth and sky." Claire's breath caught. "She predicted my arrival?" "But how?" "The spirits speak to those who listen," Stone Wolf said simply. "My mother listened better than most." Spotted Dove believes you are the white bird from her vision. The auburn in your hair catches light like white feathers. You have brought healing, and you are becoming a bridge between our world and yours. Claire touched the bear claw necklace with trembling fingers. The weight of prophecy, of destiny, settled on her shoulders. She'd never believed in such things before. Her father had been a man of science, teaching her to trust evidence over superstition. But how else could she explain the path that had led her here? The impossible series of events that had transformed a terrified captive into someone the Comanche were preparing to adopt as their own. What if I fail? She whispered. What if I'm not who your mother thought I was? Stone Wolf stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring. You have already succeeded, he said firmly. You survived when others would have broken. You chose growth over bitterness. You saved my cousin's life. You are exactly who my mother saw in her vision, whether you believe it or not. On the third day, Tall Bear himself came to instruct Claire in what the ceremony would entail. Through Stone Wolf's translation, she learned that she would be given a new name, chosen by the council based on her actions and character. She would make vows to protect the tribe and uphold Comanche ways. She would be ritually adopted into Running Deer's family, making him her brother and his wife her sister. And she would be expected to demonstrate a skill before the assembled tribe, showing what she would contribute to the community. What skill? Claire asked nervously. I'm not a warrior. I can't shoot arrows or ride like your people do. You are a healer, Stone Wolf reminded her. That is your skill. Spotted Dove will present you with a healing challenge during the ceremony. Whatever she asks, answer truthfully and do your best. That is all anyone expects. As evening approached on the third day, Claire found herself alone for the first time since preparations had begun. She'd been told to spend the hours before ceremony in quiet reflection, contemplating the life she was leaving behind and the life she was choosing. She walked to the river outcropping where she and Stone Wolf had talked weeks ago, seeking solitude and clarity. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Claire sat on the flat boulder and let her mind wander back over the incredible journey that had brought her here. She thought of her mother in St. Louis, probably believing her daughter was dead. She thought of the teaching position in Prescott that someone else would fill. She thought of the life she'd planned, so neat and proper and utterly conventional, that Claire Winters seemed like a stranger now. The woman sitting on this boulder, wearing deerskin and moccasins, speaking halting Comanche, preparing to be adopted into a tribe she'd been taught to fear. That woman was someone entirely different, stronger, braver, more capable than she'd ever imagined she could be. You are thinking too hard. Stone Wolf's voice came from behind her. I can see the smoke coming from your ears. Claire laughed despite her nervousness. I'm allowed to think hard, she retorted. I'm about to change my entire life. Stone Wolf sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cooling evening air. Are you certain this is what you want? He asked seriously. There is still time to change your mind. No one would think less of you. Would you think less of me? Claire asked before she could stop herself. No, Stone Wolf said immediately. I would respect whatever choice you made. But I confess I would be disappointed to lose you. The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Claire turned to look at him, really look at him. In the fading light, she could see the strong lines of his face, the intelligence in his dark eyes, the quiet strength that had drawn her from the beginning, even when she'd been too angry and afraid to acknowledge it. Can I ask you something? She said quietly, anything. That first day, at the trading post, why did you really buy me? And don't give me that answer about wanting fierce. I need the truth. Stone Wolf was quiet for so long that Claire thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. When I saw you standing on that platform, threatening to kill whoever touched you. I saw something I had lost: fire, passion, the refusal to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. He paused. My wife was kind and gentle, but when sickness came, she simply gave up. She had no fight in her. Watching her fade haunted me for 2 years. So you did buy me to replace her, Claire said. But without accusation. No, Stonewolf corrected. I bought you because I recognized something in you that I had lost in myself. The will to fight against impossible odds. I thought perhaps if I could protect that fire in you, I might rediscover it in myself. He smiled slightly. I did not expect you would teach me so much more. What have I taught you? Claire asked, genuinely curious. That strength comes in many forms, Stonewolf replied. That bridging two worlds requires more courage than choosing one. That sometimes the things we think we want are not what we need. He turned to face her fully. You have made me want to be better, Claire Winters. To see beyond the old ways without abandoning them. To build something new while honoring what came before. Claire felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Stonewolf, wait, he interrupted gently. Before you speak, I must tell you something. After the adoption ceremony, you will be free to make your own choices. If you wish to marry, you may choose any man in the tribe who will have you. If you wish to remain unmarried and focus on your healing work, that is also honored. I want you to know that I have no expectations. Whatever happens between us or does not happen, I will respect your decision. The careful speech, clearly prepared in advance, made Claire's throat tighten with emotion. You're saying you won't pursue me. I am saying I will not pressure you, Stonewolf clarified. But I would be lying if I said I did not hope, someday, you might choose to stand beside me. Not because you owe me anything, not because you have no other options, but because you want to. Claire reached out and took his hand. The gesture that had once been unthinkable now feeling perfectly natural. I think, she said slowly, testing the words. I think I might already want that. But I need time. I need to become whoever I'm becoming before I can promise to share that person with someone else. Stonewolf's fingers tightened around hers. Then take all the time you need, he said. I have learned patience from you. I can wait. They sat together as darkness fell, hands linked, watching stars emerge in the vast sky above. Claire felt a sense of peace settling over her that she hadn't experienced since before the raid on her uncle's wagon train. This felt right. This path she was choosing. This life she was building. This man beside her. All of it felt more right than anything in her carefully planned former existence ever had. The ceremony began as the full moon rose over the mountains. The entire tribe gathered in a great circle around a massive bonfire that sent sparks swirling into the night sky. Claire stood at the edge of the circle, her heart pounding, wearing the white deerskin dress and bear claw necklace. Spotted Dove and Laughing Water flanked her, their presence reassuring. Tall Bear stepped into the center of the circle and began to speak. His voice carried across the assembled crowd, powerful and commanding. Stonewolf had positioned himself where Claire could see him, and he translated in a low voice that only she could hear. The chief says we gather to welcome a new daughter to our people. One who came to us as a stranger but proved herself through courage and compassion. One who bridges two worlds and makes both stronger. Running Deer and his wife stepped forward, standing across the fire from Claire. Running Deer spoke, his voice still weak but steady, thanking Claire publicly for saving his life, and requesting permission to adopt her as his sister. His wife added her own words, welcoming Claire into their family. Then Spotted Dove stepped into the circle and called Claire forward. This was the moment Stonewolf had warned her about. The test of her skills. Claire walked into the firelight on shaking legs, very aware of hundreds of eyes watching her every move. Spotted Dove held up a bundle of plants and spoke a question in Comanche. Stonewolf translated quietly. She asks you to identify these plants and explain their healing uses. Claire took the bundle with trembling hands and examined each plant carefully. Some she recognized from working with spotted dove, others were unfamiliar. She spoke slowly, naming each plant she knew in both English and the Comanche words she'd learned, explaining their properties and uses. For the plants she didn't recognize, she admitted her ignorance honestly. When she finished, Spotted Dove asked another question. This time, Claire understood enough Comanche to catch the meaning without translation. What would you do for a child with fever? Claire described the treatment in halting Comanche, supplemented with gestures when words failed her. She explained cooling methods, herbal remedies, the importance of fluids. She described warning signs that might indicate serious illness requiring more intensive treatment. And she emphasized, as her father had taught her, the importance of observation and adapting treatment to each individual patient. When she finished, Spotted Dove did something unexpected. The stern old woman smiled, warm and genuine, and embraced Claire in front of the entire tribe. She spoke words that needed no translation, their meaning clear in her tone and expression. Approval, pride, welcome. Tall Bear stepped forward again and spoke at length. Stone Wolf's translation came in fragments, emotion making his voice unsteady. The council has chosen your name. You will be called Medicine Bird, for you brought healing on white wings. You will be daughter to Running Deer's family, sister to all Comanche, healer to our people, the chief continued, explaining the responsibilities Claire was accepting, the protection she would receive, the place she would hold in the tribe. Then he asked her to speak, to accept or reject the adoption in her own words. Claire stepped forward, her mind racing. She'd prepared no speech, had no eloquent words ready. So she spoke from her heart, in English first, and then in the halting Comanche she'd learned. I stand before you as someone who was lost and has been found, she began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. I came here in chains, angry and afraid, certain you were my enemies. But you showed me something I never expected. Kindness, honor, a way of life that values strength and compassion equally. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I am not abandoning who I was. I am becoming more than I was. I accept this adoption not because I have no choice, but because I choose it freely. I will be Medicine Bird, daughter of Running Deer, healer to the Comanche people. And I will work every day to prove worthy of the trust you place in me. As her words were translated for those who didn't speak English, Claire saw faces in the crowd change. Suspicion melted into acceptance. Curiosity became welcome. And when she finished speaking, the entire tribe erupted in a cheer that echoed off the canyon walls. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of ritual. She was marked with paint, symbolic representations of her new name and status. She received gifts from various families, practical items she would need for her own lodge and tokens of welcome. She danced with the women, her movements more confident now than they'd been at the feast weeks ago. She ate food prepared specially for the occasion and listened to stories told in her honor. Through it all, she was aware of Stone Wolf watching from across the fire. His expression held pride and something deeper. Something that made her pulse quicken whenever their eyes met. As the celebration finally began to wind down in the early hours of morning, Running Deer approached Claire with his wife at his side. They presented her with an unexpected gift, the deed to a small but well-appointed lodge on the edge of the camp, positioned to catch the morning sun. It had been Running Deer's before his marriage, and he'd kept it maintained for guests or family members who needed temporary shelter. Now it is yours, Stone Wolf translated Running Deer's words. A place of your own, where you may work your healing and live as you choose. You are family, but you are also independent. Both things can be true. Claire accepted the gift with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the generosity and acceptance these people had shown her. She embraced Running Deer's wife, then carefully hugged Running Deer himself. mindful of his still healing wounds as the crowd finally dispersed, people heading to their lodges to sleep away what remained of the night. Stone Wolf appeared at Claire's elbow. "I will walk you to your new home," he offered. They walked in comfortable silence through the quiet camp. At the entrance to her lodge, Claire turned to face him. The moon was setting, and the eastern sky showed the first hints of approaching dawn. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything. For buying me when you could have let me go to someone worse. For giving me choices when you could have forced me. For seeing who I could become when I couldn't see it myself. You did all the difficult work," Stone Wolf replied. "I simply created space for you to grow." Claire stepped closer, closing some of the distance that had always existed between them. "Stone Wolf, about what you said earlier. About waiting, yes?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she could see hope flaring in his eyes. "I don't think I need as much time as I thought," Claire admitted, feeling bold in the pre-dawn darkness. "I don't know what the future holds, or how long I'll stay, or what will happen next. But I know I want to find out with you beside me." Stone Wolf's breath caught. "Claire, Medicine Bird, are you saying—" "I'm saying yes," Claire interrupted. "Not right now, not today. But someday, when we're both ready, yes. I choose you. I choose this life. I choose to build something new from the ashes of what was lost." Stone Wolf reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. "May I?" he asked softly. In answer, Claire rose on her toes and kissed him. It was gentle and tentative, a promise rather than a demand, a beginning rather than a conclusion. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "Good night, Medicine Bird," Stone Wolf said, his voice rich with emotion. "Good night, Stone Wolf," Claire replied. She watched him walk away through the sleeping camp, then turned to enter her new lodge. Inside, she found it furnished with everything she would need: sleeping robes, cooking implements, storage containers, and a small collection of healing supplies that Spotted Dove must have prepared. It was sparse but comfortable, a space that was entirely her own. Claire lay down on the soft buffalo robes and stared up at the lodge poles meeting overhead. 6 weeks ago, she'd been standing on an auction platform, spitting defiance and death threats at a Comanche warrior who just purchased her for $3 silver. Now she was Medicine Bird, adopted daughter of the Comanche, healer to a tribe that had once been her enemy, and on the verge of falling completely in love with the man who'd saved her by setting her free. Life, she reflected, had a strange way of leading you exactly where you needed to be, even when the path there seemed impossible. She'd come here broken and angry, certain her life was over. Instead, she'd found a new life, a new family, a new purpose. She'd found strength she didn't know she possessed and courage she'd never needed before. Most importantly, she'd found a place where she truly belonged. Not despite being caught between two worlds, but because of it. She was the bridge Stone Wolf had spoken of, connecting cultures and carrying knowledge between them. She was Medicine Bird, white wings bringing healing. As sleep finally claimed her, Claire Winters smiled. Somewhere in St. Louis, there was a mother who believed her daughter was dead. Someday, Claire would find a way to send word that she was alive and well. But for now, for this perfect moment, she was exactly where she was meant to be. And the man who'd paid $3 silver for a defiant captive had gotten something neither of them had expected: a partner, an equal, a woman who'd chosen freely to stand beside him and build a future that belonged to neither world and both worlds at once. The sun rose over the Comanche camp, painting everything in shades of gold. And Medicine Bird, formerly Claire Winters, woke to her first morning as a fully adopted member of the tribe, ready to embrace whatever came next with the courage and fire that had brought her this far. 2 years had passed since the night Medicine Bird spoke her vows before the Comanche tribe. The river camp had become home in ways Claire Winters could never have imagined, during those first terrified days of captivity. The changing seasons marked the rhythm of her new life, each bringing challenges and joys that reshaped her understanding of belonging. She stood outside the healing lodge, grinding herbs in the early morning light. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, the motions as natural as breathing. Her auburn hair, streaked with sun-bleached strands, was braided in the Comanche style and decorated with beads Prairie Flower had made. The deerskin dress she wore was her own creation, decorated with patterns combining Comanche symbolism with her own imagination. "Medicine Bird," Prairie Flower called, running toward her. The child was now a gangly girl of 8. "My brother has the coughing sickness again. Mother says, will you come?" Claire gathered her medicine bag and followed. Prairie Flower's younger brother had weak lungs requiring careful monitoring. Cases like his taught Claire about blending her father's medical knowledge with Comanche healing practices. Neither approach alone was sufficient, but together they created something more effective after treating the boy. Claire returned to find Stone Wolf waiting outside her lodge. They'd married 6 months after her adoption in a ceremony honoring both Comanche tradition and the vows Claire remembered from childhood. Their union had surprised no one. "Your morning has been busy," Stone Wolf observed, falling into step beside her. "3 families have sought your help, and the sun has barely cleared the mountains. The coughing sickness spreads quickly in cold weather," Claire replied. "I need to gather more herbs before the next snow. I will take you tomorrow," Stone Wolf offered. They'd fallen into comfortable patterns over their year of marriage. Stone Wolf respected Claire's independence while offering support when needed. Claire valued his counsel without losing the fierce independence that had first drawn him to her. Running Deer approached with news that made Claire's heart skip. A trading party had arrived from the east with a white man carrying letters. He'd been asking if any adopted whites lived in the area, claiming he had correspondence from their families. Claire's hands trembled as she accepted the sealed letter. The handwriting was achingly familiar. Her mother's elegant script, unchanged by 2 years of separation. Stone Wolf stood close, his hand on her shoulder as she broke the seal. The letter was filled with her mother's relief at learning Claire was alive and her cautious acceptance of the life her daughter had chosen. A missionary had carried word about a white woman healer living among the Comanche. The letter made no demands or judgments. It simply expressed love and the wish that Claire was happy and safe. Tears streamed down Claire's face, and Stone Wolf's arm came around her shoulders. "Good news or sad?" he asked quietly. "Both," Claire managed. "She knows I'm alive. She's not angry that I stayed. She just wants me to be happy. And are you?" Stone Wolf asked. Claire looked around at the camp that had become her home. She thought of Spotted Dove's gruff affection and Laughing Water's friendship. She thought of Running Deer's children calling her aunt and the trust the tribe placed in her. And she thought of the man beside her, who'd paid $3 silver for a defiant captive and received a partner beyond price. "Yes," she said simply, leaning into Stone Wolf's embrace. "I'm happy. More than I ever thought possible." That evening, as the sun set over the river canyon, Medicine Bird sat with her husband outside their lodge. She held her mother's letter in one hand and Stone Wolf's hand in the other, symbols of the 2 worlds she'd learned to inhabit. She was no longer simply Claire Winters from St. Louis, but neither was she only Medicine Bird, Comanche healer. She was both and more, a bridge between worlds. The journey from that auction platform to this moment had been impossible, terrifying, and transformative. She discovered strength she never knew she possessed and built a life she'd never imagined wanting. Though she would write to her mother tomorrow, she knew with certainty that this was where she belonged. "What are you thinking?" Stone Wolf asked. Claire smiled, that expression coming easily now. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst moments lead us to exactly where we need to be," she said. "And I wouldn't change anything, not even the fear and pain, because it brought me here. To you, to this life, to home, Stone Wolf raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "The spirits work in mysterious ways," he said. "And I am grateful every day for the woman who threatened to kill me and instead taught me how to truly live." As darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, Medicine Bird leaned against her husband's shoulder and felt complete peace. The future remained uncertain, as futures always are. But whatever came next, she would face it with courage, with love, and with the knowledge that she'd found her place in the world. Not despite the impossible journey that brought her here, but because of it.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.